Welcome to episode 7 of Mental Mastery, where I interview the world's greatest minds on what it takes to live a happy and successful life. I'm your host, Max Weigand, and in today's show, I'm joined by Chief Happiness Officer Scott Crabtree. After 25 years as a tech strategist at several technology companies, Scott decided to resign his job and focus on his true passion, helping people live happy and successful lives. In 2011, he focused his company Happy Brain Science, and has since taught the science of happiness and engagement to clients such as Nike, Dreamworks, NBC, and Intel. So Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Max. Thanks for having me.
So excited. So one of the interesting things about you, in 2011, you actually left your job in order to teach people happiness. So what was that turning point in your life that made you decide like, hey, I want to teach happiness to other people?
Yeah, it was kind of a random story, to be honest, Max. I got a degree in cognitive science when I was in college back in the 80s. So I've been intrigued by the brain and what makes us tick and not tick so well for a long time. But that got me into computers and artificial intelligence, which got me into software, which got me into video games. And I basically left all that brain science stuff behind for a long time. And then I was here in Portland, Oregon, where I live, and my wife walked into a famous bookstore called Powell's here, and I saw a book turned sideways called The How of Happiness by Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky. And I picked it up, and on the back was a review from Harvard professor Daniel Gilbert, whose book I had read, Stumbling on Happiness. And Daniel Gilbert said, unlike every other book on happiness, this book, The How of Happiness by Sonia Lyubomirsky, is based on the best experimental data and will really work. And I thought, good enough for Harvard professor Daniel Gilbert, good enough for me.
For sure.
So I bought that book and read it, and it was my introduction to the science of happiness. This was must have been over a decade ago now that I first read this book. And at the time, I was fairly happy at work at Intel, but not very happy at work at Intel. And I've had some, life is hard. I've had some family members with unhappiness and more. And so I read this book and I was like, wow, solid peer-reviewed research, not somebody's opinion, but solid experimental data on choices we can make to bring more happiness to our lives. I want to do this. I want to know this. I want to do this. I want to be this. And about 6 seconds later, I thought, you're not going to do that, Scott. You're going to forget 95% of this in 6 months, the way we forget 95% of most things in 6 months. So how can you not forget all this science of happiness stuff? And what popped to mind, Max, is if you really want to learn something, you should teach it. I happen to be the kid of 2 teachers. And so I started volunteering to give talks at conferences without the slightest idea that I would do this for a living. So both internal Intel conferences, but also conferences like the Game Developers Conference, I pitched talks like the science of happiness in video game development or the science of happiness in software development. Wow. Conferences started saying yes. And so I said, great, I got to go read everything I can find about the science of happiness and talk to experts and refine my understanding and help people translate and apply this to work. So I did that, and basically it went viral in an old-fashioned, non-internet sense of the word. People kept asking me if I could do that presentation. They heard that I'd done it for this team. Could I do it for this other team or this conference? Could I do it for this other conference? And I was thrilled, and I was doing it all just on the side of my job. And then after one of my Game Developers Conference presentations, a woman from Blizzard Entertainment came up to me and said, hey, that was great. Can you come to Blizzard and do that? And I was like, for money? Yes, I'd be thrilled to do this. So that was 2011, and a couple weeks later, she emailed me and said, here are your feedback scores. You got straight A's. Can you come back once a quarter in 2012? And I thought, wait a minute, I love doing this so much, and I don't love my day job that much, and I want to make a difference for people in the world. I'm going to quit Intel and do this for a living. So that was early 2012, and I have been blessed with 6.5 of the best years of my career doing this for a living.
Wow, that is so amazing, especially that like you were able to start the whole thing as a side job and then later transition into doing this full time to doing what you actually love. I love that story.
It's funny, Max, because people used to say that people average 2.3 careers now, and I always used to think, what would I do besides lead the development of of software and video games. That's all I know how to do. So I did not see this coming. It's almost like it chose me rather than I chose it. But I'm thrilled. I love the topic. The human brain is endlessly fascinating. And obviously, you and I are both focused on the good stuff. But life is hard, right? Life is filled with disappointment and loss and pain. And so we need some tools to be happy consistently, or more happy more often, maybe is the better way to put it.
Yeah, and the thing I love about your work is you actually take these scientific things, these things that researchers study, and then put them into practical steps that anyone can teach to actually be happy. And I think that's really what so many people don't know yet, is that there's so much research out there, so many valuable tools that we all can use to live happier lives, and most people don't know about them. So I think that's absolutely incredible.
It's true. The word is spreading for sure. It's becoming much more mainstream that there is a science of happiness, which is great. I mean, when I started, I ran into a lot of like, what
are you doing?
Happiness? And now I got a lot of like, oh yeah, I think we know some of the basics. We're looking for advanced stuff or whatever. But it is amazing. To me, it's nothing short of miraculous that scientists are doing this incredible work on choices we can make to be happier. Like, sure, you can study chemistry and physics, but happiness, that seems hard to study. But there's real solid science behind it, and it can lead to a better life and us being better people. It brings so many benefits.
Oh, for sure. Actually, I'm pursuing my master's now in positive psychology. So studying like happiness, motivation, in London. So really excited to learn more about that.
Fantastic.
But yeah, actually, I read on your blog that you actually met Sonja Lyubomirsky afterwards, right? Like the person that got you into the whole field.
Yeah, I'll try not to gush too much, but Sonja Lyubomirsky is a hero of mine because, again, it was her book that really turned me on to the science of happiness, positive psychology, and more. And so I basically felt like I had to tell the world about Sonja's book and Sonja's work. And so that was my introduction to the whole field of positive psychology and more. So years go by, and I'm at the International Positive Psychology Association World Congress in Montreal last summer. And there was a raffle, fundraising, scholarship raising raffle. So all of us there could buy chances to have dinner with our positive psychology heroes. So I bought a bunch of tickets. I put them all in Sonja Lyubomirsky.
You bought the whole thing, like.
I was like, yeah, the other people are impressive, but I'm putting all my tickets in Sonja's basket. And they pull out a couple of names, and it's a last chance, and they're like, Scott Crabtree. I was like, what? So I got to have dinner with Sonja Lyubomirsky and a couple other people, and ask her about research. And I am pleased to report that she is not only an amazing researcher and writer, but a very kind person as well. So I was over the moon to have dinner with Sonja Lyubomirsky, and I hope you get a chance to have dinner with some positive psychology heroes someday.
Oh, that sounds so cool. Yeah, for sure.
In that dinner, she's one of the other people there who was a researcher asked her, any unpublished research that you're excited about? And Sonja's answer was very interesting. She said that they found the biggest boost in well-being of any intervention they've tried so far by telling people to, quote, act like an extrovert. Now, I shouldn't put quotes around that because that's not exactly what they said. They didn't say act like an extrovert. They looked at traits that extroverts have, being outgoing, being friendly, being energetic, and they told them to act those ways. Now, what introverts are thinking, listening to this, is, yeah, I'd be exhausted. For you extroverts, that works great, but for introverts, it's exhausting. Keep in mind, this is unpublished research, so it's yet to go through peer review, but what Sonja said is they're not finding exhaustion in introverts, that everybody gets a well-being boost when they act like an extrovert. So I've heard, I don't think it was Sonja, I think it was another scientist, I can't recall which one at the moment, but one said, one way of boiling down a lot of positive psychology is this: treat every elevator ride as a fun social experience. Talk to people on the elevator ride, and that's what happier people do. So, interesting stuff.
So just reach out to people whenever possible.
Yeah, and I feel the same awkwardness that a lot of people do. I get on an elevator and I'm like, Maybe they don't want to talk to me.
Yeah, put the earplugs in, like.
Maybe they won't be nice. It'll be awkward if I say anything. And since hearing this from Sonia, I try to overcome my hesitations and just say, how's it going? Or, hey, nice hotel, right? Or where, whatever. And almost every time have a delightful conversation that lifts mood. So science of happiness is largely about how we get along with each other and interact with each other, as I'm sure you are learning.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's so interesting. So Scott, outside of like its intrinsic value of, hey, I'm happy, why is happiness so important at work and in our lives?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I think happiness is its own reward. And I think your question is important and valid, but I'm surprised how often I get it, to be honest, because personally, I think if there were no other benefits, if it were just you can feel good and be happier, I'd be like, okay, what do I do? Please, But for those who need more motivation, as you know, Max, but others may not know, some of the science is very strong causal evidence, and some is weaker correlative evidence, if I'm using the word correctly there. So we need to be careful about inferring causality where there's just correlation. But so some of these studies, it's clear that the benefits are caused by happiness. Some it's less clear. But in any case, if you look at a variety of studies, and you and I are blessed to live at a time when there's a growing mountain of evidence in this area, the benefits of happiness fundamentally boil down to our brain works better in most situations when we're happier. It's not always true. There are times when it's advantageous to be in a bad mood. For example, we are more eloquent and less gullible when we're in a bad mood. So if you're trying to find the final logic errors in $1 million plan, bring your bad mood and your skepticism. But for most of the time, happiness seems to bring prime brain real estate online. So it fundamentally boils down to we human beings seem to be in sort of avoid mode or explore mode. And in avoid mode, we're getting toward fight or flight. Our brain is figuratively shrinking in the sense that our limbic system and brainstem are coming to the forefront. And in that cautious defensive state, we see only 3 options for life, basically: fight, flight, or freeze. And those are great for dealing with bears and mountain lions, but not so great for dealing with each other at work. So when we can get to a more positive place, we approach the world as, oh, there may be lots of opportunities out there. And therefore, we see more options. We are more creative, for starters. Being more creative is one of the benefits. We are more intuitive. We're more sociable. We're more energetic. We're more engaged. Happier brains notice more. We process more information in a good mood than a bad mood. We identify risks sooner. We come up with more creative ideas to address those risks. And as if we needed more benefits, happier people are also healthier. They show up in the emergency room at the hospital less often. They show up at work more often, and they live longer. That is a long list of benefits of things that I want to enjoy. And I wanted to be all that and do all that, which is why I got into the science of happiness. And I want the working world to be more like that. In my experience, it's not often enough like that. It can be. But I want the working world to be like that, which is why I decided to pursue this work full time.
Yeah, I love it. I think the way most people view work is kind of the same, that you kind of have to grind through and hate every single minute. But I know that in your work, you do a lot of work on really showing people that they can actually enjoy their work, that they can actually experience that passion and aliveness and enthusiasm at work while they're doing things that usually they do too. So what are some strategies or tactics or habits that people can use in their lives to really kind of get out of fight or flight mode, get out of that negative thinking, and really experience those positive emotions?
Yeah, great question. First of all, for me, step one is not denying negative emotions, right? Some people get into happiness because they just want to eradicate all negative emotions and only be blissed out all the time. And that's just not realistic, right? Again, I don't mean to be negative on you, or dark on your audience. But again, the sad truth is that human life is filled with pain and suffering, right? Loss, people we love die. And I'm not trying to make people sad, but I'm trying to say difficult emotions are part of life. And so to be crystal clear, positive psychology and other fields that look at thriving of human beings, they are not about eradicating negative emotions. Shame, as one example of many, shame can alert us that we have done something that maybe we don't feel that good about. Maybe we need to take some step to correct. Anger can help us want to right a wrong that's in the world or take steps to improve an injustice in the world. So negative emotions are okay by me. I don't enjoy them. A lot of people don't enjoy them, but they're part of life. And so this is not about eliminating negative emotions. You said, how do we get out of fight or flight? The first step related is to recognize you will get into fight or flight, right? The part of your brain that gets into fight or flight is much faster than your calm, logical prefrontal cortex that can say, hold on, I'm not actually under attack in this meeting. That person just asked a question that gets at the validity of my sources or whatever, so I can calm down. So anyway, part of it is recognizing negative emotions are going to come and it's okay. Scientists like to coin words, and a word they've been coining recently is emodiversity, to get at the fact that those of us who enjoy all of life's emotions or experience all of life's emotions actually thrive the most. So step one, acknowledge that life is hard and don't try to suppress those negative emotions. To the contrary, when they come, label them, recognize them. There's this phrase psychologists use, name it to tame it. So if you can say, I'm feeling ashamed or I'm feeling angry or whatever it is, it can help you acknowledge and get a handle on that emotion and then move on. How we cope with stress and hardship is key. So lots of healthy coping techniques out there. 3 of my favorites that science has validated as highly effective are exercise, social support, talking with a friend, and meditation or mindfulness. So coping with stress, key. Stress and happiness are not the same thing. It's possible to be high stress and high happiness or low stress and low happiness, but it's much easier to be low stress, high happiness, and much easier to be high stress, low happiness. So managing stress, acknowledging and coping effectively with life difficulties is area 1. Any questions or comments before I go into other ideas that people can apply?
No, I love those, especially when you talk about exercise and meditation. I really love those things for like just long-term kind of building your kind of emotional immune system, so to say. So like the ability to kind of handle negative emotions. I think we're running, especially for me, I've been running for like 7 years now. Was a student athlete actually in the US. So we're in there every day. And really, like my coach once called it, run in the morning so you're not an asshole during the day or something like that. Like it's just... And I love that view of it, of like, hey, when you run in the morning and you feel all these like positive emotions and endorphins rushing through your body, like you're just gonna feel different throughout the whole day. So I love that point. I think that's something that oftentimes isn't mentioned enough.
It's actually the first thing I did after reading The How of Happiness, because I realized I was in a pattern. I would get too busy at work to exercise, so I would not exercise for several days in a row while I was stressed out about work. And on day 4 or 5 of that, there's just no better word for it since you've already used it. I became an asshole to myself and to people around me, and that is certainly not how I want to be going through the world. So first thing I did was to vow that I would not let 3 full days in a row go by without exercise. And we all know exercise is good for our body. Not everyone knows it's also good for your brain. Kids who get exercise get higher grades. People who walk right before a test score higher on the test. So it's good for cognition. And as you may know, exercise is as effective as antidepressants in treating moderate depression in the long run. So exercise, great thing to do.
The best thing, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you have some other techniques or strategies for kind of overcoming that?
Yeah, a lot of it boils down to positive attitude, and I can almost see some eyes rolling, people listening to the podcast. Oh, great, positive attitude, spare me. So why do I talk about positive attitude when it's kind of corny or cheesy or cliche? I talk about it because science says it simply works. We are surrounded by a complex world with complex people, and we can see the best in each other or the worst in each other. And so seeing the positive in each other, seeing what's right instead of what's wrong, this might sound cheesy or easy, but as you and some others may know out there, it's actually unnatural. What is natural for us is to have what scientists call a negativity bias. So negativity bias means that if you and I and a bunch of other people, if we were looking at a picture, group picture, and most people were happy and smiling, and one person in the back were frowning with a furrowed brow, we'd immediately looking at the picture be like, what's wrong with her in the back? Why is she unhappy? We're drawn to what's wrong. And again, it keeps us alive, right? You and I are alive because all of our ancestors had a negativity bias. And out there in the cold, harsh wilderness many, many years ago, those who were like, oh, life is good, everything's great, they died. And people were like,
tiger, yeah.
Is there a lion out there? Is there a bear over there somewhere? Those people stayed alive. So we're wired to focus on what's wrong. We're wired to give more weight to negative comments than positive comments. We take more seriously the negative things that happen in our lives than the positive things. So all this talk about positive attitudes sounds easy. It's difficult. It's unnatural. And yet, through the miracle of neuroplasticity, we can rewire our brains to be more positive brains. And what feels like a cheesy, effort-filled positive attitude on day 1, on day 67 can be like, hey, I just caught myself being grateful while I ate my cereal and I wasn't even trying. That's amazing. So we can rewire our brains to have different attitudes, and positive attitude is not for everyone. That's part of the message I try to give when I'm presenting. Is this is kind of a smorgasbord, right? Science can tell us what works for most people most of the time. It cannot tell us what works for everyone all the time. So for me, and maybe for you, positive attitude works great. For somebody out there listening to this who's like, positive attitude, spare me. Cool, that's not your thing. Let's move on to some other strategies that might work then.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you say that, like, positive thinking isn't even for everyone, that like some people may need different strategies, different tools in their lives.
Here's a good example, Max. One of the classics from positive psychology is gratitude, right? Almost everybody now knows if you want to be happier, practice gratitude. Great. But it turns out that backfires on people who are depressed. On average, if you ask someone depressed to think of 3 things they're grateful for at the end of a day, they feel worse because they're depressed and they have trouble thinking of 3 things they're grateful for. So I just want to be crystal clear and really underscore this point. Science does not find what works for everyone. It finds what works for more than half of an average group. The listeners to your program, they're not an average. They're a unique individual. So experiment with your own life and figure out what works for you.
I love that. Yeah, really trying different things. And I think everyone listening to this is going to take away different things, right? Different things that work for them, whether it's gratitude or running or meditation. Everyone takes away different things and can then apply them to their life. So I think trying things out and just being willing to put yourself out there to test different things, see what works, see what doesn't, is so important. So I love that point that you're making there.
Yeah, excellent. So should we talk about some other ideas for people?
Oh, for sure, please.
Positive attitude. So the next theme I have a bunch of different workshops and presentations I do, but in my Science of Happiness one, my next theme I call Flow to Goals. And so first of all, this is about the importance of goals. Over 200 studies show that taking goals motivates higher performance. So goals, generally speaking, are good. When we make progress towards clear and meaningful goals, it is incredibly engaging and happiness producing for us. That might sound obvious, but when work led by Professor Teresa Amabile at Harvard, when they asked a bunch of business leaders what motivates people, nobody mentioned progress. So they put progress on a list of things that people were mentioning, like promotions and pay raises. And then a bunch of it wise, experienced business leaders, excuse me, they ranked progress last on the list.
Wow.
And according to Amabile's research, It is one of the best tools for producing happiness and engagement at work, what she calls quality inner work life. So they led a study with 10,000 daily work journal entries. What's going on for you? How do you feel? And they found several factors in quality inner work life, but the number one factor for them was simply progress towards clear and meaningful goals. So I talk a lot about getting clear and meaningful goals. In my experience, a lot of organizations are good at getting clear goals, not as good at making them meaningful and making sure that people really care about them. So a lot of people use SMART goals. I've developed this SMARTest goals, which attempts to add educational for a growth mindset, significant, why do you care, and T for toward, what do you want, not what do you want to avoid. Anyway, meaningful goals and progress towards those goals is huge. And one of the best ways to make progress towards our goals is to get into that focused zone that psychologists call flow. And the enemy of flow is what I call a cultural disease, multitasking.
Agreed.
We think makes us more efficient, and the evidence is abundantly clear. It slows us down. We make more mistakes. We exhaust our prefrontal cortex, our prime brain real estate, loosely speaking, right behind our forehead. And most of all, when we multitask, we get out of flow, which is this delightful zone where everything is clicking. You're right at the edge of your challenge. You're immersed in meaningful work, especially for those who aren't big on positive attitude. Flow can be huge. Like if chatting with people or positive attitude isn't your way to be happy, I'd say there's a good chance that immersing yourself in challenging work might be an option for you to consider to be happier and thrive more at work.
So what are some practical tips or advice that you could give to people to really immerse yourself and then avoid distractions? Because I think that was one of the biggest challenges for people in their lives and their work is like, how do I really like avoid distractions and emails, and how do I deal with all that stuff coming in?
Boy, it is so hard. I'm going to walk through several things, and pardon me stepping out of camera view for just a second here, but I want to show you one tool that we use here at Happy Brain Science. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is simply a whiteboard clock. So you can write whatever you want behind the clock. And what we decided as a team here is that when we show up at around 9 in the morning until just before 11, it is flow time. So when we come in the morning, we do not chat with each other. We say hi, we're friendly. Interruptions under 2 minutes can leave you in flow. So we try to have quick conversations under 2 minutes and then leave each other alone for an hour and a half or more in the morning. And not checking email first thing in the morning it's going to sound like blasphemy to so many people. Like, what? There could be important stuff in email. This is part of the problem. Look, as a game designer, I know how to get people addicted to things. And I'm not talking technically addicted. I'm using loosely. When I was at a major video game development company, by the way, I said to a room of game developers, I said, look, I'm a game designer. You're a game designer. We know how to get people addicted to things. Guy in the back raises his hand and said, we prefer extremely compelling.
Better wording, yeah.
Yeah, but we know how to get you addicted to something. And if we want to get you addicted to something, we irregularly and unpredictably exceed your expectations. The problem is this is just what email and other electronic feeds do, right? So if I get 100 emails in a day, 98 or 99 are going to be fairly predictable, run-of-the-mill. I'll take chicken at the offsite. Yes, I'll be there at the meeting. Great, I'll do this podcast interview with you, Max. And then 1 or 2 out of 100 is like, you got the huge deal, or you got the promotion, or the client said yes, or something we didn't expect. And when we get something we didn't expect, our brains basically flood with dopamine and say, whatever this was, let's do this again. Was this checking email? Let's check email like a rat in a cage that doesn't get fed every time it hits the lever. Because if you want to keep the rat hitting the lever, you feed it most of the time. Sometimes you don't, and sometimes you jackpot it with food. So we are essentially addicted to our electronic feeds. And I am not anti-technology. I spent most of my career in technology. You and I are using technology right now. I am not anti-technology. But if we want to be able to focus and get into flow, we have to turn off email and turn off the notifier. On most machines, when you get an email, there's the default way. If your company gives you a computer, for example, when you get an email, a little pop-up will come. Ding, got an email, you want to see it? I'm going to shake it back and forth. I'm going to give you the first few words and then fade out a second. It's so compelling. It's so hard to ignore. So turn off notifiers, get out of email, try to focus and flow for over an hour if possible on something that is challenging but right at the edge of your ability. If you get interrupted, try to keep it under 2 minutes if possible. You can signal to people by putting on headphones. You can hide in a coffee shop. You can say, I'm right in the middle of something critical. Can I get back to you in 45 minutes? So much easier said than done. But if you can sync up with your colleagues, shut off email and other electronic notifiers, you give yourself a much better chance of getting into flow, therefore making progress and feeling engaged and happy at work.
You know, that's such a great idea with that flow chart. I'm really amazed by it right now. If I read that correctly, it was first like 2 hours of flow work, right? Then lunch, then emails, then another 2 hours of flow work, or?
So what we try to do is about an hour and a half of flow, quick break, another hour of flow, take an hour for lunch, another hour of flow after that, and then emails and what we call bits and pieces. I lived in New Zealand for a year, so I picked up the phrase bits and pieces for little miscellaneous things. And then reflection and wrap up from 4 to 5. You know, this is aspirational. We don't always do this every day, but we try really hard to let each other flow, let each other make good progress, and then use that middle of the afternoon time when we are typically not at our best to do the little stuff. And that doesn't mean we can't talk to each other other times, right? Some of those flow times are meetings. And yes, it is possible to get into a flow in a meeting if you pay complete attention and the meeting is challenging. So it's aspirational, but we do our best. You know, I have other tools here. A friend of mine gave me this timer here. This timer is about a half an hour. So when I want to get into flow, I will turn this over and say, okay, for at least the next half hour, I'm not doing anything but focusing on this proposal to Boeing or this webinar I'm going to do with Nike or whatever it is. So flow, wonderful. Easier said than done, but various tools can help get you there.
That's so awesome. I think once you incorporate really these specific times where you block off social media and your phone and emails and everything and really focus on like what you actually want to accomplish, like the most important thing in the day, that's so powerful. So I definitely love that idea of what are you guys doing there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's go back to goals, because you talked a little bit about goal setting and progress before. Because I think the problem that many people have when they're setting goals is they only set this one huge goal, right? Of I want to run a marathon, or I want to do this, or want to do that, and they're grinding through and they're hating every single minute of it, and they finally achieve it, and they think they can be so excited, and they're excited for a day or two, and then they just kind of go back to normal. So what can we do to make sure that our goals, first of all, are exciting all the time, and then it's not just a sudden drop off of, hey, I achieved this, and 2 days later I'm like, well, next goal.
Yeah.
What can we do there?
Max. So again, I came up with this SMARTest algorithm. A lot of people know SMART. That's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound, or some variation of that. That's a good way to get a clear goal. But again, in my experience, it's a lot of organizations I've worked at are very good at getting clear goals, but not so good at getting meaningful goals with energy. So I added EST to SMARTest. The E is for educational, to nurture what Carol Dweck at Stanford would call a growth mindset. So as you may know, but perhaps some of your listeners don't know, growth mindset is wonderful because it's more resilient to setbacks. So for example, growth mindset is contrasted with a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset basically says, I'm going to prove to you how talented I am. A growth mindset says, I'm continuing to learn and grow my entire life. So if I adopt a fixed mindset, I might take a goal like do a fantastic podcast with Max. And then if I bump my computer and make noise and shake the camera, it's like, oh man, I was unprofessional. I blew it. Screw it. Now I can't do a good interview with Max. This is not going to be any good. Not very resilient to setbacks, right? If my goal is learn about being as good a podcast guest as possible, then when I bump my computer, I've learned something and I can bounce back and say, okay, I learned something about how to be a better guest. Keep my hands away from the computer that has the mic and the camera on it. So E for educational, because a growth mindset is more resilient to setbacks. So if your goal is to run that marathon and you tweak a hamstring, you learn something instead of, oh man, I blew it. So growth mindset helps with goal success. Then significant is, why should you care, right? Why do you want to run this marathon? Is it for the health benefits? Is it to be part of a team with your friend? Why does it matter to you? Too often we skip that part at work. We're like, okay, we need to reduce the bug count to under 250 bugs in the software by Thanksgiving. And any questions? All right, let's go. But sometimes the question is why? Why should we care? Who are bothered by these bugs, or who's going to enjoy the software? How's it going to be used, etc. So a lot of positive psychology is about meaning, right? And there are two kinds of happiness in the world, so to speak. There's hedonic happiness, which is pleasure, like eating an ice cream cone. And there's eudaimonic happiness. It's a Greek word for a more meaningful sense of happiness. If you buy an ice cream cone for a kid who's upset, that's eudaimonic happiness. Eating the ice cream yourself is hedonic happiness. So when we say happiness, we don't just mean light, fluffy, like, ooh, everything's great, I'm going to eat cotton candy and ice cream. No, it's deep, meaningful, satisfying life and work. And so the S in smartest for significant is, what's the meaning? Why are we doing this work? For example, I'm doing this work to try to make a lasting positive difference in people's work lives. I think life is too short to be unhappy at work. And I think people who are happier at work, they're better to their friends and family. They're better citizens of their countries at home. And so I'm doing this to make a difference, right? That's what matters to me. So what's significant to you in your goal? What's significant to your listeners in their goal? I want to get at the juice, the energy. Why do you care? What's the meaning? And then T, again, is simply describe what you want, not what you want to avoid. So if your goal was to run a marathon, it would be run a marathon, not don't sit on the couch and watch too much TV. Finally, what's not in the acronym, but I think is crucial, and you hinted at it in your good question, it's milestones, right? If progress fuels happiness, then do lots of things to mark the progress. And milestones mark the progress. So if your goal is to run a marathon a year, great. That means you want to run a mile this week and 2 miles next month, and then a 5K, and then a 10K, and then you want to work up and note all your progress. One of my favorite tools for this is visualizing progress. So I should not say which company, but I was at a major animated motion picture company. And I teach at a hallway. I teach in a classroom that's down a hallway. This hallway is next to a big room full of people doing special effects for movies. They had up on the wall what looked like children's coloring book pages, so thick black outline drawings. And it turns out, I asked about it, turns out those drawings on the wall, those thick black outline drawings, they represent a scene in the movie. And then those drawings on the wall are colored in by hand for the percentage complete that those effects are for that scene in the movie. Uh-huh. So if you walk down the hallway at this movie company, all these drawings up in the hallway, they're 25% colored in, 65% colored in, 100%, 30%, 50%, 80%. You can't go to the bathroom at this movie company without getting a palpable sense of the progress you're making towards your goal. So my question for your audience is, how can you put in more milestones? How can you measure the progress more? How can you visualize the progress more? make progress towards clear and meaningful goals, and mark and celebrate that progress to do a better, happier job of achieving those goals.
Wow, I love that, especially the story you told about kind of coloring in the pictures.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's an awesome way, yeah, for sure. Love that. So in psychology, in the last few years, there's been this huge buzz about kind of fake it till you make it. I mean, I know you know about Amy Cuddy's TED Talk on power posing. So what's your view on that? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm guessing that you and some of your listeners know the controversy behind this work. I think we are in danger of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So, as you know, Amy Cuddy's very popular TED Talk, one of the most popular in the world, said that if you adopt a wide body posture, you not only feel calmer and more assertive, but your bloodstream changes. Testosterone associated with assertiveness and present in women and men, by the way, goes up, and cortisol goes down. Other scientists have not reproduced those physical effects. And so people, and there's a bit of a crisis in psychology about replicability, people's ability to duplicate findings. So do we need to be skeptical of science? Absolutely. Science is not perfect. I trust science more than I trust any single person's opinion, but science is done by humans and we are imperfect, so we make mistakes. So apparently, Amy Cuddy's original research was not as solid as it should have been on the physical, but nobody's been able to reproduce those changes in the bloodstream. So a bunch of people are like, this is total garbage. We should never do power posing. Throw this out. And I think that's silly. Amy Cuddy's research, what other people have reproduced, is that we feel better. If I stand with my hands on my hips and my elbows out wide for a couple of minutes, everybody is finding I will feel better. I will feel calmer and more assertive. And so, I think there's subtlety here. Should we believe in fake it till you make it wholeheartedly? No, we should not. There's a scientific conversation going on. Should we completely disregard it because there's been some problems in the science? No, of course not. Multiple studies are finding you feel better if you power pose, so let's do it. This also touches on a really interesting question about authenticity, right? You may have seen Brené Brown's very popular TED Talk on being authentic and being vulnerable. And I think that's great. So there are lots of times when I would not advise people to fake it to make it. Again, letting all those unpleasant emotions come is part of being human and real and thriving. But let's face it, there are times when I need to be on my A game, so to speak. So let's say that something upsetting happened to me right before this podcast. It didn't, but let's say that I had a bad fight with my wife at home or something, or my kid was yelling at me at home right before showing up for this podcast. That's something I want to deal with later at home for sure. I don't want to deny it, but I want to be a good guest. I want to be intelligent and focused and not be like, oh, sorry, did you ask me a question? I was thinking about my fight at home, right? So in a situation like this, if I need to step up and do well at work, that's a great time to fake it till I make it. Like if standing here with my arms spread out made me feel calm and assertive and ready to focus with you, great. Why not use that tool for a little while? So look, nothing should be taken to extremes, right? Exercise is great for us. Should I go run 100 miles right now? No, I'd injure myself, right? So what's an appropriate dose for us and what's a good way of using it? So that's what I think about fake it till you make it. I think it's a useful tool for some situations, and we also want to be authentic as much as possible in life.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said before. If sometimes science isn't completely conclusive, if you just try things out, right? You try power posing or you try smiling, for example. I do that a lot. Just put a smile on my face while I'm working and it immediately feel better and more productive. Yep. And so simply trying things out, I think, and you see does it work or does it not work? Then it really doesn't matter what the science says sometimes. So I love what you're saying here. Like just try it out and see if it works, and then if it works, keep using it, right? Exactly. So Scott, do you have any advice for people that often have to deal with negative people, whether it's at work or in their family, someone that's always negative, that's always kind of looking at the negative side of things? Do you have any advice for people like that?
Boy, that is a great question. It's the question I get more than any other question in workshops, coaching clients. Most common question I get is, how do I deal with this really difficult person? And again, there's subtlety in the science, Max, because first of all, what we know from studies is that moods are literally contagious through what are called mirror neurons, which are the physiological foundation for empathy, primarily through mirror neurons and eye contact. We are literally catching our moods from each other. So wonderful research led by the late, I believe, Dr. James Fowler, UC San Diego. He's got wonderful images that I show when I present on a social network of people. So lines and clusters know each other and work together. And they code blue people are unhappy people and yellow people are happy people, and green, shades of green are in between. And what you can see in this image is how the happiness and the unhappiness clusters. So again, there's scientific evidence that there's causality here, that we are spreading our moods to each other. So that suggests don't hang out with that negative person if at all possible, because they're going to make you unhappy, right? But again, there's subtlety here, and there's choices for each of us to make as individuals. I had presented my Science of Happiness presentation dozens of times before a person at Intel in California. I happen to be in California. I can vividly remember the moment. I'm presenting this image from Dr. James Fowler that I had presented many times, and a person raises his hand and says, you know what I'm noticing? The people at the end of the lines, therefore, who have less relationships with other people, they tend to be blue. They tend to be unhappy. And I was like, wow, you're right. I've never noticed that before. And this goes back to Sonia Lyubomirsky's research and really all of positive psychology. Daniel Gilbert, who I mentioned earlier, Harvard professor, he says if you had to boil all the science of happiness down to one word, that word might be social. We are social creatures. A theme of a whole section of my presentation on happiness is called Prioritize People, or sometimes I call it Revitalize Relationships. So investing in relationships, huge. That miserable person you work with might really need you, right? And I don't mean to go all dark on you and negative on you, but especially in my country, in the US, I mean, people get violent, right? We have a lot of guns in my country, and people who are mentally ill or disturbed sometimes act out in these horrible ways. So I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on you or anybody else, but the question for each of us is, okay, you've got somebody negative and difficult in your life. Do you have it in you to try to reach out and help that person? Do you have it in you to try to spread some of your happiness to them? If so, great, and do it. By the way, this is one of the only places in the happiness data where happiness is stronger than unhappiness. I mentioned the negativity bias earlier. Usually we weigh unhappiness more. Mood spreading through a social network, according to the research led by Dr. Fowler, happiness spreads better than unhappiness. So if we have it in us to reach out and be friendly to that grumpy colleague, great. Do it and feel good about yourself and feel good that you're helping people. Being kind and generous is good for our mood. So maybe you'll get more positive than negative effect by reaching out to that unhappy person. If so, great. And the world and I thank you for reaching out to that unhappy person. But again, there's subtlety and choices here, because if you're fragile, if you're not very happy and you're on the edge of getting really unhappy, maybe dealing with that negative colleague is going to push you down into a zone where you're not functioning very well, in which case you really need to protect yourself, I think, and you need to minimize contact, recognize that their negativity is not how you're feeling. And again, this might be a time to bring in some of the fake it till you make it. Hang out with positive people, cope effectively, have a positive attitude. And if necessary, after being in a meeting, an unavoidable meeting with that grouchy person for an hour and a half, you might just walk out with a spring in your step and a smile on your face and just kind of fake yourself back into a better mood after being with that negative person. Does that help? It's a very challenging question.
Oh, for sure. And I especially love the distinction when you say it, because I think most of the times we kind of are focused on how do you avoid that person? How can I minimize the time with them? But how you're saying, like, actually extend your hand, right? Try to help them get out of that negative state. I love that. And I think that's so powerful. really to reach out to those people and say like, hey, I'm here for you, help you. So I love that.
Again, it can boil down to attitude and strengths and seeing the good in each other instead of bad in each other, right? So, I mean, Max, I've dealt with some extremely difficult people in my career. They were also very, very smart. And they made people's work better around them because they were so demanding and so negative, right? Because they're so negative, people's work around them got better. Now, you may or may not feel like you can adopt that positive attitude towards that negative person, but we all have choices, right? And one of the choices we can make is to see, boy, Karen in marketing, she really is negative, but she's really smart and she drives great results from the marketing team and other people. So yeah, she is negative and she's not always pleasant to be around, but I'm going to choose to see her upsides as well.
Yeah, I love that. So Scott, in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, habit has improved your life the most, would you say?
Wow. Wow. Another great question that is hard to answer because there has been so much.
Or just anything that just comes to your mind.
Yeah. You know, I think a couple of things come to mind for me, Max. So much of it is around people and relationships. And so what I tell people when I'm presenting is, if you don't do anything else, invest in the quality of your relationships. And so I think that is the single most important thing I have done. But it's interesting because I now have a wide variety of workshops. I have 8 or so different sessions that I do with various clients. And one of the sessions, I started by teaching the science of happiness, and then clients would say, hey, that was great. Can you do a session on learning and memory, or can you do a session on strengths or employee engagement? Well, one time I got asked to do a session on difficult relationships and difficult conversations. And honestly, that was challenging for me. I don't handle conflict terribly well. And yet, when I dove into the research and really looked at it, I realized how important it is, right? I mean, here I am saying in my Science of Happiness session, quality of our relationships is the main factor in our well-being for most people most of the time. And here are ways of investing in relationships and making them better, right? Celebrate together and see the best in each other and connect. But I wasn't talking about what do you do when things get hard. And so developing this workshop helped me really explore the science of what do you do when you and someone else disagree. And I think that is some of the most important stuff I've learned in the past 5 years is how do you deliver what scientists and Google has put particular emphasis on this, psychological safety. How do you deliver psychological safety to yourself and someone else, even in a heated disagreement, right? Even if you and I disagree on who gets the raise or who leads the project or the price we bid a project out on, I mean, something that's big and important. If we care and we disagree, lots of potential for relationship damage there, but also potential for collaboration. I mean, creativity and collaboration happen when disparate ideas are integrated in new ways. And if you and I disagree on something, it's an opportunity for us to learn things from each other and combine ideas in new ways. So I think discovering the science of how to handle those tough conversations with each other may be one of the best complements to all the fluffy, happy science of happiness stuff that we also believe in and study.
Wow, that is so interesting. So Scott, before I ask my final question, where can people find you online to learn more about you and your work?
Thank you for asking. My site is happybrainscience.com. That's Happy Brain Science, all mushed together. happybrainscience.com, and I've got a bunch of resources on there. Many are free. My blogs, videos, lots of stuff is free. And then I have a couple of products. I have a card game that teaches the science of happiness at work. And I have an online course. And of course, I offer speaking and coaching, but I'm not trying to sell anyone anything if they want it or need it. Lots of free things, including a recommended reading list and much more on happybrainscience.com. And of course, I am on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well if people want to connect there.
Awesome. I'll also put links in the show notes then so people can find you.
Thank you so much.
No, sure. So my final question, what does mental mastery mean to you?
Such a good question, and so relevant to your theme, right? Mental mastery to me means getting the best from our brains. These blobs between our ears are miraculous, right? 86 billion neurons, give or take, depending on how you spend your free time in high school and college. 86 billion neurons, averaging several thousand connections each to other neurons. That's not even counting the countless glial cells also involved in cognition. That is immense complexity, right? And we are complex creatures. We are largely wired to survive in a cold, harsh wilderness. Fight, flight, and freeze, and a bunch of other ways that our brain works are this defensive, keep us alive strategies that have been great for the vast majority of human history. Well, we are in a new time of human history, right? We can create amazing things together. We can produce positive changes in the world. We can heal pain and suffering and trauma. There's all these amazing things we can do if we can take full advantage of all of those neurons. So how do we take full advantage of all those neurons? We adopt a mental mindset of positivity and thriving and making choices that make us and people around us happier so that all of our brains can work better and we can make a better world. If I can do that and help more people do that, that to me is mental mastery.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's episode of Mental Mastery. Tune in daily for new episodes on how you can achieve mental mastery and live a happy and successful life. And if you would like a little extra push, head over to my website maxweigand.com for a free ebook on mastering self-discipline and willpower. There, you can also sign up for my one-on-one habit coaching program where I help you master your habits and achieve your goals. Also, if you like this interview, feel free to rate and review the show. Until next time,